People of Reddit who work the day shift at non-haunted businesses and don't spend all your time in the woods. What's the creepiest thing you've experienced? I'm here. Today we're back with an extremely specific Ask Reddit prompt that almost makes me wonder what exact stories the asker had to hear to make it so specific. Regardless, I hope you guys enjoy today's video. Story 1. The summer after I graduated from high school, I left work early and went up to my parents' cabin in northern Michigan. Spent that night at the beach watching the sunset. Once the sun went down and it became nearly pitch black, no light pollution, I got to my car and started driving down the highway, M22. After about 10 seconds of being at speed, there was an older Tahoe, late 90s, that started riding my arse and flashing its high beams. So I got up to about 60 and a 45. They were still on my butt. I pulled off to the side road that my parents' cabin is off of and they took the same turn. I thought this seemed weird because there's only about 30 to 40 houses on the road. So I went all the way to the end, which is usually a dead end, but leads to a maintenance area for the golf course nearby. Truck was still following me. At this point I was freaking out because if I pulled into the house, they'd know where we live, and they were still following close by. I took a ton of random turns and the truck kept following me every single turn for about 15 minutes. I finally had a chance to make a turn with traffic going through the intersection that gave me a few seconds of a head start. Pulled down a side street, went up 100 yards, turned off all my lights and waited. Truck slowly drove by the perpendicular street and kept going. Booked it home, pulled my car around the side away from the main road, and pulled every curtain. For an 18-year-old, I was scared as heck that night. I don't blame OP for being scared, but I think they did everything right they could have done in the moment, especially getting somewhere safe as soon as they got the person off their trail. I think the only other thing is if they had a garage they could pull into, that might have been wiser. Or calling the cops if possible. Story 2. 18 years old and first time ever operating a dozer with an open-air cab and roll gauge. Was clearing trees out of a waterway on a farm. All of a sudden, I'm knocked out. Come to and blood is running down my face into my lap. Dozer pushing up against a tree, just spinning tracks. My neck and head hurt. I thought I'd been shot or something. No idea, nobody around me. Wasn't told how to shut off the dozer as it was an older 6C unit. Just don't turn the key off? Called my dad and he ran over and turned and pulled the idle bar all the way down and shut it off. We both are clueless as to what happened. Then he sees a branch behind my head that I must have driven through and pushed it forward pretty far and it snapped back into the cab and hit me in the forehead. Never saw it or anything. Somebody commented, "Dang man." I had to read that twice to realize you weren't pinned between the tree and the dozer. Story 3. I'm a teacher of adult students, and one student of mine is kind of intense and creepy. Actually, she's based at another school, but specifically started attending classes at my school after meeting me. When I first started, she kept giving me welcome presents as I was new to the country. Just simple things like food, postcards, and books, which was a nice idea, but it seemed a little excessive. She added me on social media and then got upset when I didn't reply to her constant messages. I told her that I don't really use social media. Anyway, I didn't see her for a few months and figured she'd just gone back to her own school or stopped studying or whatever, and was relieved that she'd clearly got bored of me. But then last week she came in and gave me an envelope full of photos of me during lessons that she'd taken, without me knowing. I was a little weirded out to say the least. Somebody commented, "Sounds like you've got yourself a budding stalker." OP, I would talk to your boss and try to either get her out of your class or try to switch schools if possible. In the meantime, make sure this person doesn't know where you live, and double check that no one is following you when you head home. Story 4. I'm a nurse and I used to work a day shift at my old job. I was walking down the hallway with my computer on wheels, cow, to pass meds one afternoon. I was in between two patient rooms, not really close to either door, and far away from the nurse's station and kitchenette. I could hear one of the physical therapists talking to a patient in one of the rooms, but no one else was in the hallway. I was looking down at my papers to kind of get myself organized before going to see another patient. All of a sudden in my right here, like someone was standing right behind me. I heard a female voice say, "I'm cold," in a kind of jokey way, like someone would do a big shiver and then rub their arms and say, "Brr, I'm cold." I turned around thinking it was my friend Brittany goofing on me, but there was no one there. There was no one in the hallway at all. Story 5. When I was 17 and worked in retail as a cashier, I had a very old couple come through my line buying a wok. The husband, who was at least 85, started making conversation with me about the work and asked if I liked Chinese food. "Yeah, I like Chinese," I told him. "Do you want to go out with me to get some Chinese?" He winks at me. "No, sir." "Oh, Well, he looks a bit disappointed and turns to look at his wife who's on the phone with someone. Would you at least like to come home with me and live in my basement? No. The rest of the transaction took place in terrified silence. His wife never said a word. I wonder to this day if he was trying to joke because he sounded so sincere, or if he was suffering from dementia or something else that made him not realize how creepy that sounds to someone young enough to be your great-grandchild. Story 6. When I worked at a fast food restaurant, this old man came in, ordered a meal, and sat reading a book for over an hour. He had this horrible cough, and when talking to random strangers, just seemed a bit off. Well, he went to the bathroom and I was busy, and when I looked for him again, I thought he had left. A little bit later, I went to use the bathroom, and this old dude had crap all over the toilet seat and floor, and then rubbed pennies in it. The crap from his hands was all over the walls and sink. It was creepy because I had no idea if he had any contagious disease, and we had to bleach the bathroom down. Also, why was he playing with his crap and pennies? Frick that guy. I know the peculiarness of this dude is what I should be focusing on, but honestly, my heart just goes out to whoever had to clean up that mess. I one time went to use the single bathroom at this restaurant right after this guy left, and I immediately turned my butt around because they had left the fattest turd and mess I had ever seen. I looked at the dude while trying to hold back, vomit, and he and his friend booked it out of the restaurant. Needless to say, it was obvious to everyone that I wasn't the perpetrator. Story 7. Was working at an office pretty late. 100% sure I was the only one there. The AC system shuts down at 7 p.m., and until it does, you don't notice how much noise it was actually making. Office got extremely quiet, which is unsettling to begin with, and I had my office door closed. About 30 minutes later, I hear the muted voice of a little girl with a heavy British accent saying, "Mummy, I think he's in this one." Note, I live in the American South, so there is no good reason for a British child to be there. Almost crap my pants as the door cracked open ever so slightly, until a real live little girl popped her head and said, "Nope, wrong one, sorry." Turns out her American stepfather was still in the building. Story 8. I used to live in a small 2-bedroom apartment by myself. The lounge room was right outside my bedroom. One night I woke up and could hear something moving out there. I got up to check, and the pedestal fan that was out there was on and slowly oscillating back and forth. At the time, I convinced myself it was some sort of electrical fault as it was plugged into a board. It turned out all the sockets off when I turned the main switch off, which was the TV. I went back to bed and ended up getting back to sleep. It was a few days later that I realized that the fan had never been set to oscillate the whole time I owned it. I'm glad I didn't figure out that the same night. Story 9. I once found the corpse of a dead coworker. Coworker didn't come into work one day. He didn't call. He was very reliable, lived alone, and didn't have many friends outside of work. So I went over to his place and convinced his landlady to let me in. I found his dead body as an armchair in front of the TV. Heart attack. He'd been dead about 12 hours at that point. 25 years later, and I still remember the grimace of pain permanently etched on his dead face like it was yesterday. Somebody commented, "Wow, that's really sad. Good on you for checking on him, though. If it weren't for you, it could have been a long time before he was found." Yeah, OP, I'm sorry you had to see that. But at least you were able to give him some peace after he passed by allowing his family and friends a chance to know he had died and probably grieve. Story 10. I work in a supermarket, early shift, and part of my job is changing the shelf labels for the price changes each day. Just this Wednesday, I was putting new labels on a shelf of hand soap. When about 2 feet along the shelf from me, a bottle shot off and landed in the middle of the aisle. I looked along the aisle at my colleague and she just shrugs her shoulders and says, "Happens all the time." I never directly witnessed anything else, but being one of the first on the shop floor each day, I'm now questioning all the items that I see sitting in the aisles first thing, and guessing I can't blame untidy customers for them all. Story 11. Power plant worker. During shutdown, the large main steam valves tripped shut and the subsequent water and steam hammer to the main steam lines was so intense the pipes literally jumped a few feet. I thought that the place was coming down around me. The sound and shaking was so violent. Shaking my parents is scary. We're talking about steam temp and pressure that can instantly flash the entire building if there's a branch, cooking everyone inside. Even a pinhole leak has the power to cut a person in half. Seriously scary crap when things don't go right. Story 12. Was out at lunch in Midtown Atlanta with some coworkers. We sat out on the patio. There are some high-rise condos right across the street. Some guy jumped from his 40th floor balcony and splattered all over the roof of someone's Jetta. Everything went everywhere. The noise was pretty memorable as well. We noped out of there before ordering. It was a super silent ride back to work. One of my coworkers said he won't sit out on patios anymore when eating. Somebody commented, "Jesus Christ, I have to ask what it sounded like." I know that commenter wants to know, but it really is one of those things that you have to trust people when they say you really don't want to know. Like, it's genuinely so traumatizing. Because it's not the noise that's scary, it's the fact that noise is essentially the end of someone's life. That's the haunting part. Story 13. I worked for Radio Shack back in the late 90s, and I was scheduled to open on a Saturday morning. I go into the door, lock up behind me, and go to the back to get things ready, only to see my boss sitting at the chair in the back with his tie around his neck and tied up to an inventory rack with his pants around his ankles. And he's dead with his still erect dong in his hands. That is the day I started drinking heavily. Somebody commented something pretty bad. He came as he went. Story 14. At our old house, the clock on my nightstand always jumped ahead by 5-minute increments every few days. I changed it out. Electric, battery-powered, any clock that was on my nightstand would do it. Watched our room to make sure no one was messing with me. It was just weird. Drove me batty more than anything else that I could never tell the right time. Somebody commented, "Apparently your nightstand is moving closer to the speed of light than the rest of your room. Ask it what next week's winning lottery numbers are." Story 15. I often visit Walmart in the wee hours of the morning. One time I went in about 2 a.m. and noticed an elderly gentleman sleep on one of the mobility scooters at the entrance. When I left about 20 minutes later, he was still there. I thought it was a little odd that no one from the store had woken him up, but whatever. Found out the next day he had died and spent the better part of a day on display as a corpse at the entrance to Walmart. I know Walmart is a strange place, but I am a little confused that none of the employees thought to check on the guy, especially after like an hour or so. Story 16. Right after the Virginia Tech shooting, my old office got an anonymous death threat in the mail, made up of cut-up magazine letters, calling out the names of the office and its owners. They called the cops and closed the office for a couple days. Turned out to be from an employee who had just been fired for a number of reasons. Don't know what happened to her. Somebody commented, "I'm gonna take jail for 200 points. Story 17. Hearing music that isn't actually playing from the store speakers. Quiet, but there. Given the crap I was dealing with at the time, I'm fine writing it off as hallucination or delusion. Somebody commented, "This can definitely happen if you have unshielded cables running to an amplified speaker. My subwoofer used to play a Spanish radio station because of the cheap cable leading to it. Replaced the cable and never heard any quiet radio again." Story 18. I cocktail waited on a day shift at a small casino in Idaho for about 6 months during a bad time in my life. So basically everything. But especially the dude. Not very old either, I'd guess mid to late 50s, who had a stroke at a nickel slot machine, crapped himself, but dragged himself back up to keep playing while EMS was on the way. I kinda hope that the guy ended up winning at least something, given how dedicated he was to playing. I sort of wonder if he stopped playing once the EMTs got there, or if he forced them to wait while he did just one more try. Story 19. Responded to a welfare check for an elderly woman who hadn't been seen in a few days. Found her hanged in a dirt basement wearing her wedding dress, still swaying slightly. Her tongue and eyes bulged from her face and her neck was stretched out. It was freaking creepy. Somebody commented, "Always call for an assist on building searches. For safety, you know, an old lady ghost." Story 20. I used to work at a tanning salon, and one day while I was alone during my early morning shift, I heard what sounded like a full-grown man running down the hallway. I looked and there was nothing. Just me. No machines were on yet, no one else in the building. I sat in the office till my coworker arrived. Story 21. I worked from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. at a gas station in one of the nicer cities around here. And I had a gentleman look me in the eyes and ask if I'm enjoying my last day on Earth. Walked away before I could answer. Somebody commented, "Well, not anymore." What a terrifying thing to hear as you're trying to do your job at one of the most notorious jobs for getting robbed or shot at. I'm sure OP was probably watching the clock until 11:59 and 59 seconds, when they could finally breathe a sigh of relief, and that thankfully wasn't their last. Story 22. While cutting along this bike trail, me and a coworker found a mostly decayed, severed from the knee down leg. Cops were called, they questioned us, and we never found out any more about what happened. Story 23. A homeless guy tried to light my office on fire once. Pretty scary, but the cops rushed out and got him. Somebody commented, "I bet you were disappointed." Story 24. There is currently a beaver living in my place of business. We can't get it out, so we just learned to live with it. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.